Story 1. The Storm and the Stranger. The rain came down in relentless sheets on that Thanksgiving evening, transforming the quiet suburban street into a glistening, shadowed maze. Inside the warmly lit home of the Thompson family, the air was thick with the comforting aromas of roasted turkey, buttery mashed potatoes, and tangy cranberry sauce. The family was small but tightly knit. Lila Thompson, a single mother with a heart as big as her culinary ambitions, presided over the gathering. Her daughters, Nancy, the fiercely independent eldest who'd long since carved out her own life in the city, and Jamie, the dreamy youngest, still tethered to the comforts of home, buzzed around the kitchen. Lila's parents, George and Evelyn, had braved the storm to join them, their presence adding a layer of nostalgia to the evening. George, a lifelong Dallas Cowboys devotee, had claimed the recliner in the living room, his eyes glued to the flickering screen of the football game, while Evelyn fussed over the pies she'd brought, insisting they needed just a touch more time in the oven. The clock struck 5, and the grandparents' arrival had been a small ordeal. Lila and Jamie had dashed out into the deluge, umbrellas flapping uselessly against the wind, to guide George and Evelyn up the slick front steps. Once safely inside, the house seemed to cocoon them from the storm's fury. The living room glowed with the soft light of lamps and the television's flicker, and the clinking of dishes in the kitchen created a symphony of domesticity. By 6 o'clock, as was tradition, the family gathered around the dining table, a veritable feast spread before them. The table groaned under the weight of golden brown turkey, succulent leg of lamb, fluffy cornbread, and a rainbow of side dishes that seemed to multiply with every passing minute. Wine flowed freely, laughter punctuated the air, and stories of Thanksgivings past wove a tapestry of shared history. But as the evening wore on, the storm outside grew fiercer, its howls seeping through the walls. The family had migrated back to the living room, sprawled across couches and armchairs, when the sharp chime of the doorbell pierced the cozy atmosphere. Lila froze, her wineglass halfway to her lips. "Who could that be?" she murmured, her voice tinged with unease. The family exchanged glances, the unspoken weight of their fractured history with Lila's ex-husband, Richard, hanging in the air. Though they hadn't spoken in years, the possibility of him showing up unannounced wasn't entirely unthinkable. "Ethan, go check," Lila said, nodding toward her son, the only young man in the house and, at 22, the de facto protector of the evening. Ethan approached the front door, his heart thudding against his ribs. The rain battered the awning, creating a deafening roar that drowned out any sound from the other side. "Who's there?" he shouted, pressing his ear to the wood. No clear response came, only a muffled murmur that could have been a man's voice. Cautiously, he cracked open the inner door, keeping the storm door locked. Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw a figure. A man, his face obscured by the hood of a voluminous raincoat. The stranger stepped closer, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I'm hungry," he called, his words carrying a plaintive edge. "Can you spare some food? The Lord will bless you for your kindness." Ethan hesitated, his instincts warring with his compassion. He returned to the living room, where his family waited with bated breath. "There's a guy out there," he said, lowering his voice. "Says he's hungry, might be homeless." Lila's face tightened, her maternal instincts clashing with her wariness. "Close the door, Ethan," she said firmly. But Evelyn, ever the soft-hearted matriarch, shook her head. "We have so much food, Lila. We can't turn him away on Thanksgiving." Torn, Ethan decided to compromise. "I'll make him a plate," he said, heading to the kitchen. He piled leftovers onto a stack of paper plates, doubling them up to shield the food from the rain. When he returned to the door, the man was still there, a dark silhouette against the storm. Ethan held up the plate, signaling his intent. But the man's hand shot out, tugging at the storm door's handle. "Wait, it's locked!" Ethan shouted, his unease spiking. Against his better judgment, he unlatched the door, intending to pass the food through a narrow gap. But the moment the lock clicked, the stranger yanked the door open with startling force, lunging forward. Ethan's reflexes kicked in. He hurled the plate at the man, food scattering across the porch, and braced himself against the doorframe. "Nancy!" he bellowed, his voice raw with panic. His sister appeared at his side, her face pale but determined. Together, they pushed against the stranger's weight, but Ethan's blood ran cold as he glimpsed two more figures sprinting up the walkway, their forms blurred by the rain. With a surge of adrenaline, he and Nancy forced the door shut, the lock clicking just as the other men reached the stoop. Ethan didn't pause to think. He raced to the back door, ensuring it was bolted, then darted from window to window, scanning the darkness. The family was in chaos. Lila was on the phone with the police, her voice trembling, while Jamie clung to Evelyn, who whispered prayers under her breath. Through the kitchen window, Ethan caught sight of two figures dashing across the backyard, their silhouettes vanishing through the gate. The police arrived minutes later, their flashlights cutting through the rain. The scattered food still littered the porch, untouched, a grim reminder that the strangers hadn't come for charity. The officers searched the property but found no trace of the men. As the family huddled together, shaken but unharmed, Ethan couldn't shake the weight of his grandmother's words. "I just wanted to help," she said, her voice breaking. Lila squeezed her hand. "We all did, Mom, but we're safe now." The next week, a doorbell camera was installed, its unblinking eye a silent sentinel against the unpredictability of the world outside. Story 2. The Shadow of Obsession. Melissa had always loved Thanksgiving at her parents' house, a sprawling colonial in a quiet New England town. The holiday was a rare chance to reconnect with cousins and uncles she hadn't seen in months, their laughter and stories filling the house with warmth. That year, the dining room was a tableau of abundance. Golden turkey, creamy mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pies that her mother had spent days perfecting. The chatter was lively, the wine glasses clinked, and for a moment, Melissa felt cocooned in the safety of family. But as the afternoon unfolded, a shadow crept into her world. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she excused herself to check it, expecting a holiday greeting from a friend. Instead, she found a wall of text from an unknown number. "Hey Melissa, hope your Thanksgiving is going well," it began, the tone deceptively friendly. Her stomach churned as she read on, the words growing more personal, more invasive. She knew who it was before she reached the end. Kevin, a man she'd never met in person, but whose presence had haunted her for months. Their connection had started innocently enough on a dating app. Kevin's profile was charming, his messages witty, and for a while they texted and exchanged Snapchat stories. But his intensity soon became suffocating. He'd flood her inbox with messages, demand explanations for her every post, and grow belligerent when she didn't respond quickly enough. When she'd posted a photo of herself and a male friend grabbing drinks, Kevin's jealousy had erupted into a threatening tirade. Terrified, Melissa had blocked him on every platform, hoping to sever the connection, but Kevin was relentless, creating new accounts to follow her, each one a ghostly echo of his obsession. The text she received at Thanksgiving was a novella of manipulation, weaving flattery with veiled threats. Melissa's hands trembled as she typed a response. "If you keep contacting me, I'll go to the police." Her grandmother, noticing her distraction, chided her to put the phone away, and Melissa complied, forcing herself to rejoin the family's banter. But the reprieve was short-lived. Another text arrived, this one from a different number, its tone darker, more venomous. Melissa ignored it, determined not to let Kevin ruin her holiday. She laughed at her uncle's jokes, helped clear the table, and tried to lose herself in the rhythm of family. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Melissa slipped away to read the latest message. It was a vicious diatribe, accusing her of betraying him, mocking her attempts to escape his reach. She showed the text to her parents, who were horrified. "You're going to the police tomorrow," her mother insisted, her voice firm. Melissa nodded, her resolve hardening. She drove back to her apartment, a cozy lower-floor unit she shared with her friend Chelsea, and settled in to unwind with a Christmas rom-com, Surviving Christmas. The familiar glow of the TV was a small comfort, but her nerves were still raw. Then she heard it, footsteps in the apartment, deliberate and heavy. Chelsea wasn't due home until morning, and the sound sent a jolt of fear through Melissa's body. The footsteps stopped at her bedroom door, and the knob rattled, twisting against the lock she always secured out of habit. "Chelsea," she called, her voice shaking. The rattling stopped, replaced by the soft tread of retreating steps. Heart pounding, Melissa grabbed her phone and saw a new text from yet another number. "Good thing you made it obvious where you live." Panic seized her. She called Chelsea, who confirmed she was still with her family, then dialed her parents, whispering to her father that she thought Kevin was in the house. Her father arrived in record time, his car screeching into the driveway. Melissa let him in, the front door still locked, and together they searched the apartment. In the kitchen, her father slid open the large window by the sink, a window Melissa rarely locked, and gave her a look of exasperation. "This is how he got in," he said, his voice a mix of relief and reprimand. They found no one, but the violation lingered. Melissa spent the night at her parents' house, and the next morning, her father accompanied her to the county court to file for a restraining order. Months later, Melissa faced Kevin in court, his eyes cold and unrepentant. The judge extended the restraining order, citing the barrage of threatening texts as evidence of his danger. Though Melissa could never prove he'd entered her apartment, the legal barrier gave her a fragile sense of security. As she left the courtroom, she prayed Kevin's obsession would end with her, sparing others the terror she'd endured. Story 3. The Lake House Intruders. In the heart of Central Florida, where the land stretched wide and wild, Thanksgiving at Uncle Ben's lake house was always an event. The house, a weathered but sturdy structure perched on the edge of a sprawling lake, was surrounded by dense woods and a handful of distant neighbors. Ben, a burly man with a penchant for cold beer and country music, transformed the holiday into a raucous celebration. His wife, Mel, tempered his exuberance with her quiet pragmatism, while their teenage son, Jake, reveled in the chaos. That year, the extended family, parents, cousins, and a smattering of aunts, arrived under a blazing afternoon sun, ready for a day of revelry. The backyard was a carnival of activity. Coolers brimmed with ice-cold beers, a cornhole game drew competitive shouts, and a basketball hoop saw fleeting use before the players, weighed down by chips and dip, collapsed into lawn chairs. Music blasted from a portable speaker, a mix of classic rock and modern country that set the tone for the day. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Mel and Ben began setting up the feast under the large gazebo, its wooden beams strung with fairy lights. The table was a masterpiece of excess: turkey, ham, collard greens, cornbread, and pecan pies that promised a sugar coma. By sunset, the family was seated, the gazebo's lights casting a warm glow against the encroaching darkness. The lake house's isolation, usually a source of peace, took on a different character as night fell. The woods beyond the yard seemed to pulse with secrets, their shadows deepening under the starless sky. Midway through dinner, Jake's fork paused midair. "Dad, who's that?" he said, pointing toward the tree line. All eyes followed his gaze to a solitary figure standing just beyond the yard, motionless, like a specter summoned by the night. Ben, his face flushed from beer, stood and strode toward the stranger. "Can I help you?" he called, his voice carrying a mix of bravado and irritation. Before he reached the halfway mark, the figure turned and melted into the woods. Ben returned to the table, chuckling. "Probably some local weirdo," he said, waving it off, but Mel's lips tightened, and the younger cousins exchanged uneasy glances. The meal resumed, but the mood had shifted, the laughter more forced. Then, as the family dug into second helpings, another figure appeared, this time closer to the lake. "There's another one!" Jake shouted, his voice cracking. Ben's patience snapped. He marched toward the new intruder, his shouts laced with profanity, but the man vanished into the trees before Ben could close the distance. The family's unease grew when a third figure emerged on the opposite side of the yard, standing brazenly in the open. Ben, now joined by his brother-in-law, Tom, and nephew Ryan, advanced as a group, their footsteps heavy with purpose. But the figure fled, leaving only the rustle of leaves in his wake. The family abandoned the gazebo, retreating to the house with plates and platters in tow. Inside, the living room felt like a fortress, its walls a barrier against the unknown. Ben left the outdoor lights on, their beams slicing through the darkness, but the sense of being watched lingered. Ryan volunteered to grab more beers from the cooler, stepping outside with a bravado he didn't feel. The gazebo light was off now, though he was certain it had been on earlier. As he reached the cooler, a chair scraped against the concrete, and he spun to see a towering figure, easily 6'5", moving under the gazebo. "Uncle Ben!" Ryan shouted, sprinting back to the house. Ben and Tom rushed out, but the figure was gone. Then came a new sound, loud bangs against the house's siding, as if someone were pounding the walls in mockery. The men's bravado faltered, replaced by a primal fear. Inside, Mel drew every curtain, her hands shaking. Ben, his usual defiance shaken, called the police, a decision that felt like a surrender. As the family waited, a deafening crash shattered the tension. A kitchen window exploded inward. Glass sprang across the floor. A brick lay among the shards, a note tied to it with twine. "Leave now." Mel screamed for Ben to get his rifle, but he admitted it hadn't been loaded in years. Before panic could fully take hold, a police siren wailed outside, and the intruders scattered. The officer found no one, but the missing Trump flag in the yard the next day fueled speculation. "Probably some punks with a political grudge," Ben muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. The family stayed the night, sleeping fitfully, their holiday tainted by the specter of unseen enemies. As they left the lake house the next morning, the woods seemed to watch them go, silent but unyielding, a reminder that even in the heart of celebration, darkness could find a way in.